It's fantastic to see so many faces, so many familiar faces. It's the 6th event of diversity inclusion in Germany, and the topic for today is neurodiversity. So thank you for being here with us. I see lots of people who join us for the 5th time, for the 6th time, for the 4th time. So really nice to see that you keep coming to the events, which means that there is some value in it for you. My name is Ola Helios. I'm a diversity inclusion trainer and consultant, and a person who's really passionate about the topic. Today we have fantastic 2 people who are going to share their story, share their experiences, and share the practical tools and examples of how do you create inclusive spaces for people with neurodiversity, and how can we as a society create more for inclusion rather than just integration. So when it comes to diversity, this topic is not so, I would say, I wouldn't want to use this word, but not so popular. And there is also there are lots of misunderstanding, and there is a lack of awareness. So that's why I decided it will be a very interesting topic for everybody to learn a little bit more about, because it's becoming more of innovation, there is more creativity, there is a lot more that it's connected to neurodiversity. So before we go into that, I would like to do a little bit of introduction and how we're going to go ahead, what is the structure, and how we're going to present today. A bit of introduction of why I started this 10 events. It's 10 events, started 6 weeks ago on a weekly basis, 10 different topics about diversity and inclusion. It was the more of a reactive response to Black Lives Matter movement, to see that, number one, the racism, discrimination, and white privilege, all those problems and challenges are not just US American issue, it also happens in Germany. At the same time, while there is a lot of conversation going on around diversity, is to bring attention to other types of diversity, because today it's Black Lives Matter, tomorrow there is something else. So it should not be the conversation sparked by a murder. It should be a conversation that happens on a regular basis. So the way is going to go ahead today, we're going to focus more on Germany than anything else, and compare to the UK, how is it proceed, what are the procedures, what are the laws, and what are the stories of people here. It's all safe and brave space. With the goal to have a safe and brave space, we have disabled chat, not just to keep you folks, not to keep you folks shut, but with the goal to keep the audience engaged and included, and not having flashes of Zoom coming up through the questions. You can ask all your questions via Slido using the codes neurodiversity, was also in the email. So go to slido.com, hashtag neurodiversity. There you'll be able to ask all the questions. And before you ask questions, I would like to ask a question to you. So this is the agenda here. What is neurodiversity, immunology, and stories? So you're going to have 2 parts. First of all, it's a presentation, then it's more of a panel discussion. But before we go, you ask questions to us. We are going to ask questions to you. Why are you here? And what drives you to be part of this event? So please go to slido.com, hashtag neurodiversity, and please answer the question. It's for us to understand your expectations, your motivations, and what do you expect from the event, and as well as how familiar you are with the topic. So go ahead. In the meantime, I will admit some people who are entering the room. Okay, we have a couple of responses coming through. Thanks very much. So the leading one now is, I don't know much about the topic and I would like to learn more. Thank you for that. Okay, just to let you know, a bit of a disclaimer, I'm a diversity inclusion trainer, but I do not specialize in neurodiversity. So I'm just like you here, folks, to learn and explore, and to ask maybe sometimes embarrassing or silly questions, so to say, but there is no silly question. We are here to learn. It's the first step to tackle our ignorance until now. So from what we see now is that the leading answer from 11 participants at the moment, I would like to learn how to conduct interviews, hire, work with people with neurodiversity, which is brilliant to see, because it means that you really want to take concrete steps, or your company wants to take concrete steps. We also see that I have a colleague with neurodiversities and I want to adapt my behavior and make them feel more included in the workplace. Brilliant. Maybe a couple of more answers before we go ahead, and then we can go more into details of what neurodiversity is in general. Okay, 13 answers. That's okay. I'm going to close the poll. Thank you for all those who answered. We can go back into the presentation. So what is exactly neurodiversity? The term has been discussed more and more in the past few years, because massive companies like SAP and Microsoft and BSF starting to look more into employing people with neurodiversity. At the same time, we see that in the majority of the population, neurodiversity employment doesn't really work that well as we want. So sure, Microsoft and SAP hire some people, but it's a fraction compared to the rest of people with neurodiversity. So as you can see here, only 10% population is, 10% population is neurodivergent, and 16% of autistic adults. And this data is from UK specifically. It's couldn't really find very reliable data about Germany, but just to give you a bit of overview. So what exactly is neurodiversity when you think about the term? So neurodiversity is a descriptor for a range of traditionally known as neurological conditions that basically impact the way you learn, your moods, attention, sociability, and other functions. And it affects all people differently. So we can say that people on autistic spectrum, for example, tend to be more introverted or avoid eye contact, but it will not be necessarily true to say that everybody on the autistic spectrum is exactly the same and affects them exactly the same way. So every person in the neurodiversity is very unique in how neurodiversity affects them. So we hear a lot of stories that a lot of disabilities, when you ask people about what do you imagine disability to be, or what do you imagine health impact to be, a lot of people, when they hear what disability, they imagine a person confined to a wheelchair, or a blind person, or someone who's severely deformed. And that means that majority of disabilities people imagine are visible. But the reality is that majority of disabilities are invisible. And this invisibility affects the way people act, behave, and see the world. So when your disabilities are invisible, there's a lot of stigma, and there are lots of misunderstanding, because that's not how my reality comes to when I see a person who is disabled, because I cannot see anything. So disabilities are not apparent. So people who have invisible disability are often seen as lazy, or you can't focus on social. Why can't you make eye contact, or even weird, or sometimes even faking or cheating, which is even worse. Why are you parking here? You're clearly not disabled, yeah, but not every disability is visible. So if you look more into that, those are some of the neurodiversities out there: dyspraxia, dyslexia, ADHD, ASD, Tourette's, and so on and so forth. So you don't need to take screenshots. I will send all the slides, all information later, but it's basically an overview. So the way it affects people, it's very different. And if you look at all those people here, you could see some famous people. All those people live with a neurodiversity. You might have known that, might have not known that, but those are the current conditions those people associate themselves with. So it's dyslexia, ADHD, We have a Harry Potter couple here, Emma Watson and Daniel Radcliffe, also with neurodiversities. So there is a lot of conversations about neurodiversities, and the question is that might be someone in your environment or in your family or even at your work that has a neurodiversity. And it could be that they don't know about that, because neurodiversities are quite often very difficult to diagnose, and a lot of people are diagnosed later in life, or never even diagnosed, or they simply don't want to tell you this. And by having these different behaviors, you attribute it to their behavior rather than their diagnosis. So a lot of those people here actually were diagnosed much later in life. And there were lots of rumors that a lot of famous people, like the founder of Apple or Albert Einstein, were also had a neurodiversity, but they just never known about that. So before we go into that, I would like you to question yourself. What is neurodiversity to you? What do you imagine neurodiversity to be? And how could it impact people surrounded you? Because there is a lot of stigma, there is a lot of stereotypes, and there is a lot of misunderstanding how it all happens. And more importantly, it's not enough information. We talk a lot about different types of diversities, about gender equality, about race, about LGBTQA, but neurodiversity, it's not talked about enough. And that's exactly why, the reason why we're here is to break a little bit of stereotypes and start a conversation. So feel free to ask all questions in Slido. So with this in mind, there is enough of information about what I personally understand about neurodiversity. That's my understanding. We have more experts to actually share the story, share the expertise, and give you a bit of more understanding. So Franziska and Daniel, hi. Franziska, brilliant to have you here. Could you please tell us, how are you, first of all? Where are you and why are you here? And what do you do?
Of course, of course. So where am I? I'm in Berlin, smack in the middle of Berlin, and my wonderful home office, aka my kitchen, which is one of the reasons I won't show you around, because it's my kitchen. I'm not very good looking at the moment. So why am I here? Why am I speaking on this topic? I am first and foremost a coach. I coach a lot of people in tech or doing doing tech jobs. In my main job, I am a people lead, or as they would say, a team lead. I do manage 3 IT teams, not functionally, but from a disciplinary and coaching perspective. And that's basically the concept of a people lead. So I see the side of the employer in a lot of scenarios, in addition to my coaching. And me personally, I live with chronic illnesses, so I'm not on the neurodivergent spectrum, but I do live with chronic illnesses, and I'm very vocal about that. I do a lot of advocacy on the fact, specifically because I live with 2 manifestations of chronic illness that are not well researched, so very much in the same boat with the state of research that's currently being done on a lot of things. And for me, speaking up and out is one of the things that's very important to do, and to give perspective and voice to some things that might not be apparent. And as to the question of how I am, I'm doing well, and I'm doing well because I'm looking forward to speaking on the topic and getting to know different perspectives in this call.
Thank you. Brilliant to have you here. Daniel, same question to you.
Thank you. It's really good to be here, Ola, and thanks for inviting me along to this. I'm doing really well today. I'm here in London, and I would describe my kind of role as somebody that supports neurodivergent individuals in the workplace. So I have the pleasure of working with lots of neurodivergent individuals, conducting workplace needs assessments and workplace coaching. And I also help organisations to build a process of support for their neurodivergent staff and help them with things like their recruitment strategy and their overall awareness really about neurodiversity and the benefits of having a neurodiverse workforce.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, since we're already talking about processes and how companies understand that, Daniel, what are the most common misconceptions and prejudices about when a company or when someone hears the word, oh, I know someone who has a neurodiversity, or I'm a neurodivergent person? What do people automatically associate it with?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think a lot of people assume that neurodivergent conditions are related to IQ or have a relation to IQ, and they definitely don't. So I've had experience of supporting and helping neurodivergent professors of university. So really, really intelligent people that have neurodivergent conditions. I also think there's a lot of misconception about related strengths and related challenges. So each neurodivergent individual will have their own set of strengths, their own set of challenges, and they'll be on a different scale as well. So we shouldn't assume things like all dyslexic individuals have challenges with reading and writing, because I've had the pleasure of working with dyslexic people who are really excellent at both of those things. And we shouldn't also assume that all dyslexic individuals, for example, are really creative people, because I've met some dyslexic individuals who aren't, including myself. And yeah, there's many other misconceptions. I think particularly in the UK, organisations think that providing support to neurodivergent individuals is going to be really costly and really expensive, when in the majority of cases it actually isn't. And we have a scheme in the UK called Access to Work, which employers can, well, the individual would apply to themselves, and they can get funding for the adjustments that they need. And you touched on this before, but again, there's some misconceptions around neurodivergent people potentially being lazy or not paying attention to detail, when actually that's very much not the case, and far from the truth. It's just that those individuals haven't been exposed to really good strategies to help themselves. And I think that's everything. Sorry, I've got my little list here and I think I've ticked everything off now.
Awesome, thanks very much. What about you, Franziska?
Daniel, you mentioned a lot of misconceptions, right? And I find that too, that there are stereotypes are sometimes really important to have because they give us orientation, but they can also be really, really damaging. And I see this a lot in the workplace. And you mentioned, if people don't have eye contact, for example, then they're being perceived as being antisocial, which is not the case. And from my perspective, I very much would wish for more openness generally, both from employee side as well as employer side, to not put reactions or mannerisms into a box. Oftentimes we look at people and then we use words like, oh, that's so weird. Mm-hmm. What is weird, by which standards? There's always a reference point, first of all, and secondly, it's how we should actually all question ourselves and our biases and how we perceive people. I can say this from my perspective. I do a lot of things that when it meets the eye, don't look standard, but they are necessary for my well-being. And on the other hand, what I find also very, very important and imperative is that we have psychological safety in the workplace, so that the individuals who have those conditions, who live with that, are able to share that and to let people know and inform people. Because oftentimes when I speak to people about that, or they know about, like, maybe a colleague who lives with that, the reaction is different, because actually it shouldn't be, but it is, because then they're like, oh, I didn't know that this person had that. That explains so much. And then there is a debate or there's an exchange about what does it actually mean. And once we start communicating about things, that's when we can make things better. That's when we can engage people. That's how we can onboard people to specific scenarios or accommodations, even understanding what accommodations mean. And I very much echo your sentiment, Daniel. We don't always need to spend loads of money to make things happen. Accommodations specifically, there's a huge range of accommodations that are easy, cost effective, and can be quickly done, but there needs to be a will on the employer side to actually implement that and provide that to people.
I so agree the fact that first step, it has to definitely create safe space, because if somebody has a condition, you're not going to go around and tell everybody in your workplace, like, I have the condition, deal with that. So it's something that needs to come from the environment where you feel safe space to actually discuss that, whether it's your colleagues or your clients or your boss or your subordinates. There needs to be conversation about that. That's definitely true. And also it's like really echoing in terms of the more people sort of come out. To be honest, I didn't even know the term until I did my research. I thought it's only coming for different types of diversities, that the more people come out as the neurodivergent or having a condition, the more awareness it creates. And a lot of people, as mentioned before, don't even know or diagnose later in life. So Daniel, it's a question to you. How did you feel? In our first conversation, our introductory call, you mentioned that you've learned only later in life that you're dyslexic. How did it feel to you? Was it more for relief, like, oh, okay, now it explains a lot, or was it fear, or was it rejection? How did it feel to you?
Yeah, I think it was a real mixture of emotions, actually. So I found out that I was dyslexic when I was 30. So by that point, I'd gone through education, I'd had lots of different employment roles. And I think initially, when I first found out, there was a sense of relief. I had an answer for why I was experiencing certain challenges, why I found certain situations quite difficult. So there was that instant feeling of relief, but then there was lots of other emotions. I felt sort of anger and frustration that I'd gone through life and it hadn't been spotted in school. You reflect back to certain things that were told to you at school and how you were made to feel. And, I remember at school just being very confused at why I was really good at some things and then not very good at other things. And no matter how hard I tried with certain subjects, I just couldn't grasp them. So there was that kind of feeling. And then, there was a bit of sadness as well. There was a bit of sadness that, this had really contributed to my and going through life not knowing why I was experiencing challenges and just comparing myself to others around me. So, if you imagine yourself at work, I was looking around at my colleagues thinking, well, you're really great at that and you grasp that really quickly and you always contribute in meetings. And then I just, would compare myself and I thought, I'm just stupid. I'm just not very intelligent because they can do it and I can't. So there was a bit of sadness, I think, in, reflecting back. But then, it did turn into more positive emotion. And then, I was able to sort of have an understanding of myself, a bit more self-aware of my behavior and my challenges, which helped grow confidence. And sorry, one example that I want to discuss actually is when I had my workplace needs assessment, one of the first things that my assessor said to me was, do you always find yourself apologizing? And the emotion of that question was something that you know, I can't really compare to, because I just burst into tears and I said, yes, I'm constantly apologizing for forgetting things, apologizing for, you know, so many things that were related to the fact that I hadn't got control of my challenges. So yeah, an answer to your question, roller coaster of emotions, but now I'm in a very good place with it.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that you found the answers, because I would imagine so many people either too afraid to diagnose themselves because, or are afraid to be checked because it's easier to reject it, or they don't even realize that, and they blame themselves and trying to fit in the society. And the society has very, very different normality, so to say, and you have to mask yourself to fit in, and questioning your abilities and questioning your normality. But there is no normal, so to say. There is a neuronormal in a sense.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
and did you have to come out? Did you decide to come out like publicly? Or do you know anybody who, when they were diagnosed and they found the answers to the questions, decided to officially publicly come out as a neurodivergent person? What are usually path people take?
Yeah, I think it differs between individuals. Some individuals, when they're diagnosed with a neurodivergent condition, you know, do want to be very open about it because they struggled for a long time. They want to be open to their line managers and their employers because they want to gain support and access to that support, and obviously being open to certain colleagues about that in your workplace will help you get that support. But then I have come across individuals that don't want to share that information with others because they are really fearful that they're going to be judged. And going back to the misconceptions and prejudices that we were talking about earlier, you know, that they're still worried that they're going to have those. So I think it is very personal, and I think something that really encourages people to disclose and feel that they can do that is by providing a safe place and a safe environment for them to do so. So if as an organization you've got a really clear process of support, you are you know, there's some really positive examples of where the organization have helped other neurodivergent people and supported them really well, and actively, you know, encourage neurodiverse or neurodivergent individuals to come and work for them, then people within that organization are going to feel a lot more confident about disclosing their neurodivergent condition.
Thank you for sharing that. And to the audience, I would like to welcome you to, if possible, if you feel comfortable, to turn your camera on, because we're talking about a quite sensitive topic at the moment. And I won't be able to see anybody because I'm recording, but you'll be able to, all the speakers and everybody else will be able to see, but it's not going to be recorded. So just to create a bit of a safer space for the speakers and for other individuals. I would really appreciate that. Thank you very much. The question to Franziska, what do you think, like from an employer perspective, somebody who works with corporates, somebody who works with startups, what are the most common barriers for people with a neurodivergent condition in a society and in a workplace?
I think I mentioned one of the most pressing ones, and that's the perception from other people. We do have a tendency in society, and specifically in environments where there are a lot of high-performing or self-identifying high-performing people, to always expect sort of, first of all, the best, and also to even sometimes unknowingly adhere to sort of, I often call this sort of clique structures, where you are adhering to what you perceive to be the norm or the standard, or what your environment would want you to be like, so you fit in and you can have your career and so forth. So it's very tempting to do that. And people who show different mannerisms from that are often perceived to be different or the other. And that already is a big challenge, because but also that's at the same time a good thing, because the one thing we can work on is our mindset, our individual mindset, and how we perceive people. It starts with our mindset, because once we change that, or once we even think about that, we also change our language and the behavior that we show to other people. So not judging, questioning your biases, really good thing to do, and I would expect that from everyone. Now, me having worked in tech, obviously tech is sort of a tricky environment, because on the one hand we have sort of you can come to work in, let's say, jeans and t-shirt, and you don't have to wear the suit and, you know, adhere to all of those rituals oftentimes. And that's why a lot of neurodivergent people actually go into tech. And it's not the only thing, or the only reason why they do that, but it's sort of, it provides already an environment where you can be a little bit less adhering to specific standards and rules. And also just generally, and going also to sort of the more defined aspects. One of the things that, as I said also in my previous statement, is that as an employer, open your mind. Make sure that you even think about the fact that there are people on your staff that might be different, and that can be from a disability, chronic illness, or neurodiversity point of view, or even other diversities. There are a lot of intersectionality as well. And I vividly remember the example of one of my speakers at a previous event on neurodiversity, who had to wait 1 month for an accommodation to go through. So that is time that takes away from that person being productive in the environment. Sometimes it only takes an approval, and if the approval process is 1 month, then you keep this person from actually doing what you're paying that person to do. So think about your mindset. Think about some of the routines that you have. Think about some of the easy things that you can change and implement to make sure that you integrate people with whatever need they might have. And again, that requires all of us, each and every one of us, to know of these things and to question ourselves, which is, for a lot of people and a lot of situations and scenarios, a lot to ask. But I'm very positive, I'm optimistic, and I think that if we spread the knowledge, then slowly, bit by bit, this will come to be more to have an acceptance generally, and we will be on a good path forward.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't know what you don't know. There is, unfortunately, our education system and our society doesn't really educate us about, you know, different types of neurodiversity, different types of the fact there are invisible disabilities. So the fact that, you know, the high spectrum functioning person, the low spectrum functioning person, there is, you know, all this understanding of neurodiversity is very different. At the same time, I would like to, you know, when we are currently in the situation, if somebody's watching this video later in, you know, a couple of years time when video goes viral, we are currently in COVID-19, few months through that, a lot of companies are working remotely. So I see from a perspective with different types of diversity, for example, parents or introverts, they embrace this remote work. They feel safer to be home. They feel the psychological space, it's there. They don't need to be in the open space environment, socializing, doing this chit chat, having all this noise. Has it changed for people who are neurodivergent? Has it created a little bit, I'm not sure how your experience is, so people in your environment, the question for both of you, Daniel and Franziska, in terms of how it impacts the community of people with neurodiversity. Is it better? Is remote work a positive thing?
I would say that from my experience of conducting workplace needs assessments, so I've been helping a lot of people because of the change in circumstance, because they're now working from home. So there will be a number of neurodivergent individuals who actually working from home isn't great for them, because now they're having to adapt to these different styles of working. It could be that actually their routine has gone, that they relied quite heavily upon. The things that they had access to in the workplace, some of the support they had access to, they won't necessarily have that at home, or that there's a delay in them having that. So for some individuals, that change is quite huge, and the impact of that is quite huge. So I have seen a number of people where it's had that type of impact. But then also I have come across individuals where, yes, working from home is great for them because they don't have the noise distractions. They can focus and concentrate more. When they're having meetings now at work, they tend to be a bit more focused. So, you know, lots of different things. And I think one of the things that this really highlights is that each neurodivergent person is different. Yeah. And we all react differently to things, and we all need different things. So it's important that, you know, we don't make any assumptions, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for being so clear. It's very important to distinguish.
One addition, Ola, I think your microphone emits noises when the paper goes over that. Just wanted to add that because we've just heard that with the microphone and the.
Thank you for being inclusive with my paper and moving abilities. Good. When we talk about workforce, how companies can integrate people who with neurodivergent people, do you believe in quotas, or do you believe more of a company strategy and idea that you will be committed to that? What are your takes on that?
I'm very, very vocal when it comes to quotas, when it comes to gender diversity. Not because I generally believe in quotas, but I feel like if we look at the current stats, it will take 200 more years to have, for example, pay equality in Germany. So quotas are a very good measure to help that along. I am a bit cautious though with quotas that are, and even with gender, it can be tricky because for a quota to work, you need to have a category or box to put people in. Mm-hmm. And that oftentimes requires self-identification. And can we expect that from people? I have the perspective, I'm very open with what I live with. Other people might not want to be, and they don't want to be put into a box. They don't want to have data on the record that either they put on a printed out slip or they enter into a system where it's electronically stored. That, for example, they are on the autism spectrum. Are people comfortable with that? So I feel like the question is more or less, do we actually want people to self-identify, and do we enable people to self-identify anonymously or like assigned to the person so we can identify the person with clear name and everything? There is no clear yes or no. As Daniel said, everyone is individual. And you would have to think about that as an employer, whether you want to go with that step and how your employees would react to that. Is it possible? Is it feasible? Does it do any good in that situation?
Absolutely. And I would imagine also for people who have neurodivergent, well, it's always who are neurodivergent, to when you apply, do you want to submit all papers of proving your condition, or would it come up later in the interview, or do you want to hide the condition until you get a job? It's also because we when we had our first chat, you mentioned a very, very interesting story when you were still working full time for that company. Would you like to share it? What happened there?
Do you mean me, Ola, or do you mean Daniel?
You.
I'm not necessarily sure which story you're referring to.
When somebody you were recruiting for a position, if you want to share that story.
I actually cannot think of it currently, so I'm very sorry for that.
No worries. No, that's fine.
I just can add from the perspective that with my chronic illnesses, I'm not beyond the 50% in Germany, mm-hmm. So I'm not recognized by the state, and that in itself can be tricky, even with self-identification. Even if you have as an employer the stance that you only go by what the person identifies with and not necessarily the paperwork they bring. But that can be tricky because I do identify as being chronically ill, so I would very much box myself. I'm one of those people to actually go to the workplace and be like, I'm chronically ill, deal with it. Not that extreme though, but in the sense, I explain a lot what I live with and why I do things sometimes differently, and I'm still on the highly functioning end of the spectrum. And that's where I see the challenge, basically, that what are the standards for quotas or self-identification? And that's even where countries differ, where societies differ, yeah. Where personal choices differ, and that's where it can become tricky.
Mm-hmm. And I also imagine for a lot of companies, it's easier to pay the fine if they don't meet the quota and hire someone sometimes.
It is. It is.
Yeah. And now, what is the situation in UK?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be really, really careful with quotas, because I think what we want really is for organisations to reflect what society looks like. But if we go back to your original chart that was provided by the CIPD that said 10% of the population are neurodivergent, well, I would actually argue that it's probably a lot more than that, because lots of people don't realise they're neurodivergent, and lots of individuals haven't, come forward and been diagnosed. So I think we have to be careful from that perspective. And also, when we start looking at quotas, what can happen, and what I have seen happen, is that organisations might do a great big targeted recruitment campaign. We want lots of autistic individuals, for example, to come and work for us, because autistic people are really good at X, Y, and Z, when actually not all autistic people are good at X, Y, and Z. They're each, they're individuals, and we need to be really, really careful that we're not putting people into categories and into boxes. So I think yes, we want to reflect society, but we need to be careful how we do that.
So what is in your understanding, Daniel, when I say accessible employer, what do you understand by that? As a person who works in the area, a person who has the diagnosis, how do you understand it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, an accessible employer is an employer that really understands their obligations to provide support for neurodivergent people, and really understand the benefits of doing that. So they're not just doing it to tick a box, they're doing it because they know if they support those individuals, they're going to have people that, feel well supported, work really well, but that's going to have a real overall benefit to the organisation. Because if you support neurodivergent individuals, what will happen then is that you'll see their strengths, their skills, and you can tap into that talent. And I think other things that I've thought about on this is that, employers, they really need to have a person-centered approach when they're supporting their neurodivergent members of staff. And one size doesn't fit all, so that to me is about accessibility. You want the employer to actively really want to create an inclusive environment, and that's that they have to sort of be really willing to adapt to do that. So it's okay to say, okay, I'm an employer, we really want to bring lots of neurodivergent into work here, but if you're actually not really going to properly support them, or you're going to say, oh well, we'll just get them a workplace needs assessment and that's it, job done, we'll get them the reasonable adjustment, it needs to go a lot further than that, and you need to create that safe environment that people feel able to discuss their neurodivergent conditions and be open about what they need. And the other thing, the last point I'd like to make about this is that one really simple thing that an employer can do to be more accessible is actually, as soon as you can, just ask people what they need. What is it that you need to do this role, to do this job? Now, the individual might not know everything that they need, but they'll know some things, and it's a really good start for that person. Opens up the dialogue of what else you might need. So just simply sort of asking that question can be really beneficial.
I really like what you said about people-centric approach, which is very basic and seems to be very common sense, but quite often it's when I work also with companies that we want to have more diverse people, blah, 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 blah. And then they end up wanting to hire a minority groups, and then to look like charity. It shouldn't be like a handout for people, for minorities, for non-representatives, or it should not either be like a promotion, like, look, we hired so many people, we are so good. But quite often it's also like ticking the box just to show that we are so diverse but it doesn't necessarily mean inclusion. It's even worse because people have to fit in your environment, that it's not accessible, that it's not inclusive, and they have to, you know, once again mask themselves and pretend to be someone else. And Francisca, from your perspective, what is an accessible employer?
I mean, Daniel summarized it.
What would you call accessible from your experience? Who will you call?
Daniel summarized it so well, I have a feeling, when he said, ask people, because it doesn't even touch like the sense of you are diverse in some shape or form. It's just, what do you need? You know, it opens up communication, conversations. And even for a person who's, let's say, being perceived as being on the healthy spectrum and, you know, fitting sort of the standard type of what we would consider to be a standard representation, like sort of white male, fit in a specific age bracket. Even they, you know, everybody has needs. And if we open up that question, we can find out so much about people. And for me, and Daniel, I think you also mentioned that. So I just want to underline that it's constantly working on it. That's essential. It's not just, you know, let's do this initiative and then we're done and that's fine. But it's sort of, to be an accessible employer, you have to, first of all, again, have the mindset, you have to have the willingness, the openness, and you have to be willing to enter a process that's hurtful, because questioning yourself usually leads to some form of hurt along the way, because we're all not perfect. And that can be a tricky process. So if you're willing to do that, and if you're willing to look sort of that in the eye, you're already so much ahead, and you're already so well established in everything you do, and that will trickle down to a lot of the mechanisms and the routines that you have. But yeah, I've messed up with people that are on the chronic illness spectrum, so people that sort of are in my community, and then I apologized, and it was hurtful, but it was a very good process to make sure that I understand their needs. And if I mess up, then hey, I apologize, right? So making sure that we have this openness, that is essential. And I do see that we can encourage that even more going forward, again, by spreading knowledge and making sure that each and every one of us who already has an awareness for that helps to educate other people along the line, so that we have this as a concept and not just chasing certifications for the sake of certification on our logo.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I agree. Like I have exactly, you know, when I work also with companies, it's like sometimes, especially when this Black Lives Matter movement happened, a lot of companies approach, oh, really want to have a workshop about racism, or we want to say discrimination. Like, why? Does it take your company to change strategy because there was some murder? Like, I'm going to be as blunt as it is. Do you change your company policy because of that? It shouldn't be. It has to be internal. It should not be extrinsic. And, you know, unless you can only do that if you're really committed to that, if you really, as you said, Francisca, you know, looking inside of yourself, it's ugly, it's not comfortable, you need to change. It doesn't take one program to roll out and then everybody's happy, everybody graduated, you got a scholarship for, you know, women empowerment or whatever there is, and then everybody happy, but you need to look at the processes and policies and guidelines and so on and so forth. It's not pretty. Not a pretty look what you got to see inside. And it's a change for everyone, and changes, not many people like to see changes because it's unknown, you know what's happening, so it requires lots of commitment, lots of guts to become accessible employer.
I went to a training course and had a conversation with a HR director, and she was telling me that the way that they tried to change the culture within her organization was to actually assume that everybody has a disability of some sort, and assume that everybody needs some form of reasonable adjustment. And then that really changes the culture, because every single person that's coming into that organization now is asked, what is it that you need? What is it that you need in order to do your job? And actually, you know, every single person, whether you identify with having a disability or not, there are certain things that we all like and we prefer to make us work efficiently and well. So I thought that was a really kind of interesting way of trying to change the culture.
I love it. It's like from the inside, then looking at what can you fix. It shouldn't be the people that need fixing. It should be the company that needs to change it. Really interesting.
Yeah.
And the next question will be more, there will also speculate, there are lots of different, I would say, schools of thought, schools of belief, what neurodiversity is exactly. Is it disability, or is it more for diversity of thought? And I'm not very familiar with the topic because I'm not, I'm not an expert in that. But Franziska, would you like maybe a little bit elaborate on that, what we talked about just before?
So basically, there is this whole question of, is neurodiversity a disability or isn't it, right? And oftentimes there is this conclusion of neurodiversity is a disability because society makes it one. So because we don't provide environments that, as in the assumption of the HR director, that everybody comes in with some form of disability, we don't even think about that the load is not on the person, or that the person shouldn't be fixed, but that the load is on the provider of the environment, so that the person can thrive. And this is something last week I gave a talk to my colleagues in my company about that as well. And I said, sort of just going in and not assuming that everyone can eat everything that everyone else can, is already the right step, because you already have on your mind that there could be something that's not standard, right? So I think scientifically there are various definitions, obviously, and to this date I still see a lot of debate on sort of the specialities and these aspects. Would I consider it a disability? I actually don't want to, have that nailed down. I just see it as as a term that describes well what some of us are living with, and how we can support those people. And labels, again, stereotypes, labels, they help us to orient, and it's important so that we get an awareness and a knowledge for that. But it's how we deal with that knowledge that's really the thing that matters, not how we scientifically define something that pertains to how we interact with each other. That is what is important.
Thank you for that. Let's get more into more practical approach and practical parts, because we see a lot of our audience wants to know, how can I work with people, how can I recruit, how can I hire and proceed with a job interview with people who are neurodivergent. What are some practical procedures, or how can you adapt your recruitment strategy to adapt to someone who is neurodivergent? How can you create a more inclusive recruitment cycle, Franziska?
I think that, Daniel, I have to get back to your ask people aspect, because that was also part of our discussion last week within the circle of leads within my company. How do we actually provide that? And asking people is a very good mechanism. Oftentimes, of course, there are people who don't feel comfortable sharing something, but we did have, and maybe that was the story that I was referring to, Ola, I'm not sure. We did have someone who self-identified as being on the neurodivergent spectrum, and was clearly able to articulate which kind of accommodations they needed in the process. So that is already a good thing, because there are so many manifestations of things that we perceive to be chronic illness, disability, neurodiversity. As an employer, it's really difficult to have standard processes in place that cover all of these aspects. But what we can do is swarm knowledge. Every person, every individual knows best what works for them. So asking that and being open about that. I even had the question of, so what if they are using a screen reader in a remote interview? Yeah, then they use a screen reader. Then you have the patience to listen to that and to not judge a person, to not perceive it as disturbing. Then it's on you on the other side to sort of bear that mechanism, right? So whatever kind of accommodations we can provide that are feasible to do, that are easy to do for us, not, and even if they are complicated, that's sort of the other side, the flip side of the coin. Even if they are complicated, let's think about how we can make that possible, right? And then also sort of a standard that I feel is very important is not just looking at accommodation specifically for specific people, but having an inclusive language, inclusive behavior, not assuming that, you know, as in my case, oftentimes we do have a lot of high percentages of men in programming. So we oftentimes just assume that someone who's a tech lead or applies for a tech lead position would be a man. Is that always the case? No, it isn't. And just having that open mind to not having, or to use a language that uses, for example, pronouns that cover all genders and so forth already helps a lot as well. So there is a wider spectrum to that as well, instead of just the core things. So again, for complex questions, there are no easy answers. They're often complex answers, and it helps to reflect on that and to look at every angle and how it can be improved, and have the willingness to do it, to implement it in the process, and then ask for feedback. That's always good. Ask people about their experience in the hiring process. There's lots you can take away from genuine feedback from people that have participated in the hiring process, and implement it. Make sure that it's taken seriously and implemented.
Yeah, we have a question from the more like a comment from the audience, and I actually see the lots of comments. I want to have all the questions at the end, but it seems like we're going to just integrate them more into the process because there are lots of engaged audiences here. So Amanda is saying that she's currently job hunting and not into the whole open space offices. Any tips how to when mention the topic in the interview, as you just mentioned. So it's really important, yeah, if there are any of the very inclusive employers that you folks might know of, just point it out where Amanda could apply to.
Just a word of caution, Amanda, maybe I can add that there are a lot of processes out there where it might be challenging to have psychological safety to talk about it. So listen to your gut. That's usually a very good indicator, and make sure that you feel comfortable first before disclosing, because when you disclose, you want, even just disclosing is such a negative phrasing, right? Why would you disclose something? But you want to make sure that you can do that confidently. And you mentioned synesthesia. I have that too, so great to have that shout out.
Brilliant. I see there is more of a conversations in Slido than questions. So if you have any questions, folks, please ask questions so we could follow them. But it's quite interesting in terms of, sorry, let me just, oh yeah, there's a question here to me. The same question from the anonymous. It's really important for me to articulate the business value of neurodiversity to my executives in their language. Any suggestions?
Can I jump in again? Sorry, I'm monopolizing the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've discussed this quite a lot, and I used to hate numbers. Numbers used to be like chasing me. Now I like numbers. Why do I like numbers? Now I like stats. Because stats are a very powerful tool, and often with decision makers, you have to imagine statistically, decision makers are people that have not had a lot of experience with disability, chronic illness, or being on a neurodivergent spectrum, because our society prefers by mechanism people that are fit, healthy, standing for the norm in decision-making roles. So, and again, I'm categorizing, I'm sorry for doing that, but I am. And they love stats. They love sort of the economic value that you can somehow prove. And it helps immensely to have one or two stats studies ready to quote that. I've seen quite a lot of transformation when it came to gender diversity. On when I just, one of the recent studies was McKinsey, and they actually showed that gender mixed teams perform 25% better than the monolithic teams. And then there was like 25%. So showing that, improving that, and in case of neurodiversity, I found that there are a lot of case studies as well. So we talked about Spezialisterne, for example. There is a really good case from the Hebrew military. You can think about military as much as you want, like whatever you want, but enabling people who otherwise would not have been able to do military service, and to use the unique talents that they bring to the table to enable them to do military service in a society where that is valued and necessary to go ahead in your career. Brilliant. So quoting case studies, stats, studies, equip yourself, bring them on, and decision makers will probably love you for that. Just one of those tips that I discussed extensively with a lot
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's like really, really concrete. So instead of looking at it in a negative way, looking at it in a positive way. It's like, what am I, not about what my needs are, but like I have like a lot of people, from what I read, it's like have exceptional attention, problem solving skills, creativity, and for the employee to see you as something unique, or like a diamond that they will never ever find. It's like, for you to untackle this special abilities, they need to have a special environment, and then you will thrive. So like, it's like all flowers need different different conditions and different environments, and so every person is. So just if you be able to provide this environment, then everybody gonna thrive, which is easy to say, but
And Ola, just going back to Amanda's question there, and about you know, finding employers that are going to support you and that embrace neurodiversity. I really do encourage people to do a lot of research about the organisation that they're intending to apply for, to see what kind of support they've given to people in the past, what kind of process do they already have in place. And I mean, if you can find this information on their website or in some of their social media communication, I think that gives you some reassurance that actually, okay, I can be quite open about this and I'm likely to be supported. And where there isn't that information, I think asking those type of questions in the application process and in the recruitment process is really important, because that will give you a sense then, depending on their reaction, of how invested they are to support you. And I've said to people before, you know, ask yourself the question, do I really want to work somewhere where I'm not getting a good feeling that they're going to support me? Do I want to struggle there and experience challenges and then not be supported? So you do have to go with your gut sometimes, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a very similar question. It was last week, or last week we talked about gender equality. It was a very similar question. How do I make sure that this employer is going to support me as a woman, is going to, you know, I will be able to proceed there and not just be junior manager for 10 years there. And the simple answer was just looking at the board of directors, looking at the executive team, C-level team, which is not so easy when it comes to neurodiversity, for sure, because it's not as visible. It's not that obvious. But yeah, research, then I would say lots of research, whether they even mention it. And I know a lot of companies, I don't know how is it in UK, but a lot of companies in Germany, they just add this very standard at the end of every job description, like, oh, we are so diverse, we like, regardless of nationality, race, blah, 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 blah. I encourage everyone. Sure, okay, but it doesn't, to me, doesn't tell much. I think it's more like a copy paste for everyone.
And adding on to that, it's very easy to put something on hiring pages. It's very easy to say something in the application process. And that's why my background is in community management, and I'm a big fan of building up your own network and community, because that, like, I'm in a situation now where, specifically in Berlin, I probably know all of the 10 companies by 2 degrees. So it's very easy for me to be like, hey, company XYZ, you're working there, you know someone who's working there, then you can reach out to them, you can have a call, and you can ask how it is for the people working there. Absolutely. That gives you so much more insight. So specifically the people that are starting out with their career, go to networking events. Nowadays they're all online, so you probably don't have to leave your couch. Connect with people afterwards on LinkedIn. Make sure that you build up this network, and through the network you will get intelligence about so many things other than just even companies, but it helps immensely to be able to, you know, just mirror with people that are in that company or in that influence of the company.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, Glassdoor is also a very good source for that. And there is someone who is going to be speaking in the event in 2 weeks' time about LGBTQI plus, and she mentioned a really cool thing. Not to, you know, break out all the things she's going to talk about, but they started an open source Glassdoor like platform where you rate companies on the inclusivity when it comes to LGBTQI+, which is really, really cool initiative. And anybody can just add information, and if it's really important to you, you can really see that. So I would love to see more initiatives like that. If you could have not just Glassdoor, but neurodiversity, this, and this, and actually rank company on all different levels, and you actually see, is it worth even applying and spending half a day writing your application letter if you know this company is not going to be a good fit? Good. Let's we have about 15 minutes more. I have some questions. Sorry, just let me check. I see. Once again, the audience, if you have any specific questions, please ask them, because there is no possible way for me to read all your comments here. I know there is a lot of support going for Amanda finding a job, which is really nice. If there is one specific thing we can achieve with this event, if you can get Amanda a job, I would be very happy. So it's all about love, spread the word. So please, Amanda, add me on LinkedIn later. I'm also can refer you to a couple of companies and a couple of people. So the next question I would like to ask to you folks is, what needs to happen? Like, looking at the next step, what needs to happen in your opinion in our society, for our society to see of a normalization of a neurodiversity in our society, in the workplace, in our society? Does it need to come from government? Does it need to, something horrible need to happen, like, God forbid, Black Lives Matter? But what needs to happen? Or is it just more of the matter of time, where in the past a lot of other marginalized groups were considered as wrong and incorrect, like it's a disability, that's the mental, like how in the past homosexuality was considered the disease of the mind. So what needs to happen in your opinion, and how long build until it's more accepted in the society?
I think particularly in the UK, there needs to be a lot more training for teachers around neurodivergent conditions, because from my knowledge, there isn't really a huge amount of training available to them. And, you know, teachers have access to children. They're able to spot, if they are trained, they are able to spot indicators and signpost children to the right support. So finding out that you've got a neurodivergent condition at a young age and receiving appropriate support, and sort of being aware that, you know, you are normal, and actually it's wonderful that we have people like you that think in the way that you do, process like you do, I think is going to make a big impact. I think, you know, that funding needs to be available as well for children to be able to access diagnostic assessments and support in schools. You know, there's some really good practice in the UK, but also there are lots of local authorities and councils where they don't have the funding to actually be able to you know, fund these things. So I think that's really important. And, you know, again, going back to teaching, I think we need to think about the way that we teach in schools. You know, at least one in seven pupils in the classroom are going to be neurodivergent, and they're likely to be taught in a way that doesn't work for the way that they learn and the way that they process information. So that child is constantly going to have to be working really hard, trying to catch up. They'll excel in certain things and not in others. So, you know, we really, I think, have to look at the way that we are actually teaching, so that it's accessible for all children in the classroom. And then in the workplace, I think, you know, workplaces need to strive to be neuro-inclusive in all of their practices. So you can't just be neuro-inclusive in your recruitment practices, because yes, you might get some really great talent, you know, through the door, but unless you support them and unless you provide that environment where they can thrive, you won't necessarily get the best out of those individuals. So my kind of top advice really to employers is that you have to have a really clear process of support in place. You have to create an environment where people feel safe to speak out about their neurodivergent condition and how that affects them, you know, and really be willing to adjust and change and think outside the box. So earlier when we were talking about recruitment, okay, ask the individual what they might need, but face-to-face interview, somebody might be more comfortable actually drawing a mind map to answer your question. An autistic person, you know, what are we judging when we have an autistic person in front of us at face-to-face interview? Their social competence? Not, we shouldn't be. So maybe, you know, doing an interview over Zoom with the cameras turned off, you're more likely to make that first person feel comfortable. So, you know, I think we really need to open our minds to wanting to change and really seeing the benefits of doing that.
So are you saying that it will make more inclusive to provide choice for people when they apply for the interview? And they, for example, we're invited to the interview, you provide them with a choice. You have a choice to have in-person interview, or video call, phone call, video call but no camera on. Would it help, like all those little steps what people can offer they whatever is more comfortable for them? So
yeah,
more,
I think so. I think in the ideal world, you know, as part of the recruitment process, calling individuals up they want to interview and that you've assessed are suitable for the job, asking them what they need, providing examples of what could be in place. But you want to build that relationship up with that individual right from the beginning and have a really good understanding. So yes, I think you're right, giving them the choice. Do you actually have to have a face-to-face interview? How would you feel comfortable in answering these questions? What do you need if we were going to do a test, for example, or an assessment? What is it that will make you perform at your best? So yeah, I think it's about giving people choice, but also showing them that there are these examples, so then they feel safe and comfortable with saying, oh, actually, yes, I need this. I think that's quite important.
More like creating a space. What other types of accommodations? We talked about accommodations or different tools before, like screen writing, what other types of accommodation are there available for different types of neurodivergent people?
Yeah, there are lots. I would say the most effective form of support that you can give to a neurodivergent individual is workplace coaching, where you know, an expert who has a lot of knowledge about how neurodivergent conditions affect individuals in the workplace works with that individual over a program of coaching to help them develop coping strategies. Because what I've come across quite a lot is that lots of neurodivergent individuals really determined, really want to do a good job, really conscientious, but they just haven't necessarily been exposed to good coping strategies because they haven't had any specialist support before. They didn't find out at school that they were neurodivergent. So they come to the workplace really hard working, very, very great and excel in certain areas, but they might struggle in others. So getting exposure to those coping strategies and developing that with an expert is, you know, the impact of that is huge. And then secondary to that, I think, would be there are some really good assistive technology that can help neurodivergent individuals with multiple different challenges. So, you know, there's really great text-to-speech and speech-to-text software. There's really good software that helps people organize and manage their time. So that there's some really great support. Yeah, I would highly recommend, if you can get access to workplace coaching and develop good coping strategies, that is what you're going to find most effective and is going to have the most impact, I think.
Brilliant.
Danny, Danny, I was going to say something similar as well.
Great.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to learn about all different types of accommodations and different tools that you don't know what you don't know. But once you, and as you mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation, it's not that difficult to integrate. But the impact that you make, the environment you create, makes such a big difference.
Ola, may I add two more aspects?
That was my next question.
I feel like generally, and I take that even outside of the 2 points, if we look at what needs to change, more kindness generally in our society, in our institutions, in teaching, you need more kindness. That is not to excuse people, but especially here in Germany, all people who have grown up in Germany will know this one piece of literature where they talk about how a German mother is supposed to raise her German child. And it's very much about harsh discipline, and, you know, the child should not be accustomed to being, you know, to get that comfort from the mother or from the father. It's just, that's still kind of prevalent in a lot of things that we do. So just being more kind to each other, that takes probably billions of people to turn that around, but it helps immensely to have more of a mindset of kindness. And specifically 2 aspects that come to mind for me, and one of those things, Daniel, thank you for adding that coaching perspective. I coach engineering managers, tech leads on a lot of aspects like communication and so forth, and just even having feedback techniques, for example, and knowing how to develop a team and to make sure that there are these things between people, that already makes a big difference. And just understanding that there is chronic illness, there is disability, and there is neurodiversity, and there are different mannerisms, and that does not make a person per se worse, or, you know, it makes them, actually enriches the environment. Mm-hmm. To understand that and to help people who are in leadership and management positions, and the whole startup scene, you know, founders, we can educate people more, and we can help them by coaching. And coaching in its essence is already a mechanism where you help people have their own insights versus you telling them what to do or you sharing your experience. So that's a very good mechanism that enables people to take that into consideration. And one of the aspects that I find very, very, very important is intersectionality, and specifically intersectionality from the point of gender as well, because it is a known fact that I used to think for long years, like, neurodiversity, men are more affected. No, they're not. They're just diagnosed more. And when we look at gender medicine, that's a very new concept. There's actually a new chair for gender medicine in Berlin, which is really cool. So if we look at that whole field of why are men being treated differently from women, and why are women being treated differently from men, and having also other genders on our agenda and our point, and sort of considering that as well. Why is that? Because we a lot of the things that we associate with neurodiversity are more apparent sort of in our society with men or with boys when they manifest early. So why is that? And also, I don't see, and I don't have any statistic on that, but I don't see a lot of people of color being diagnosed with neurodiversity. That might have a different reason. I don't know that, but I would assume that it's probably because of what we are educated with in our society, and some of the conceptions and the things that are in our minds. And also, again, medicine and people in diagnostic positions being more likely to be probably white. That is a factor as well. So knowing of intersectionality, what it means, and taking that into consideration as well, and not just seeing sort of categories of diversity as islands unto themselves, but we are all connected with this, and helping each other, building community, instigating debate, and that way we can have even a more varied and more differentiated perspective on that, and that enables us to meet needs more effectively at the end of the day. So those were some of the thoughts that came to my mind when you asked that very, very big question.
You gave a very, very specific, very good answer.
Yeah, because that's sort of, again, as with Black Lives Matter movement, all lives matter, but with the statistics and with what is currently going on, we need to prioritize looking at specific aspects, because in that instance we have a higher prevalence for Black people, for example, dying than white people. So we need to look at the things that are more pressing sometimes than others, and those, I feel, are some of the areas that we can work on more urgently.
Brilliant. I think it's an amazing summary of the event, and it's an amazing summary, a recap of a very, very complex topic. So yeah, really thank you for both of you for providing us all this information, your experiences with that. And it's also quite interesting to compare how long do we have to go in where Germany is and where UK is, and how is it different? Because you could see the difference, quite a bit of a difference in terms of conversation and statistics, because I personally could not find much of statistics, but CIPD from UK provided a lot of very interesting information. So I will send all the reports, all the articles in the follow-up email for everyone, and as well there is a LinkedIn group that you provide all the information with slides, recording, and so on and so forth. So with this in mind, I'd like to say, first of all, thank you to the audience for the great questions, for the great engagement. There is a lot of going on. Everybody's looking for a job for Amanda. So we'll follow up on that later. And more importantly, thank you, Francisca and Daniel, for your brilliant insights. I personally learned a lot, and brilliant conversation. Really appreciate that. Thanks for that. And moreover, we're going to have the next event next week on Tuesday at 5. We're going to address unconscious bias. It's going to be more of a workshop. It's not going to be shared publicly. It's going to be just for participants, because it's a more interactive and personal insights. So please join that. Connect with us on LinkedIn. All information is shared on our event page. So if you have any questions, if you would like to support, speak at the event, and so on and so forth, just like to have a chat, virtual coffee, please message us, and have a nice evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.